Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, good morning, good afternoon. I'm pleased to open today's webinar, which has a double value. It is organized in the frame of the training course organized by the UNESCO chair at the Venice University. At the same time, is the third event of the series When Water Speak, organized by the Global Network of Water Museums in cooperation with Oxford University. The series of these webinars, When Water Speak, was inaugurated on the 22nd of March for the World Water Day this year and aims at providing and stimulating new interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary approaches towards water and rivers in particular, inviting both artists and scientists to talk together. So in our previous webinars, we focused already on two rivers, one on the Himalaya, the Gandaki River, and the second in Ethiopia, on the Earthwatch River Basin. Both webinars were also enriched by the contribution of a PEC group that composed musical videos on those rivers. And this time we are going to focus in the Netherlands, but not only the Netherlands, and see also some musical compositions made by the artist Kate Moore. I have the pleasure to introduce you now to Professor Carl Matthias Vansen, who is the UNESCO chair on river culture. I had the pleasure to meet Professor Vansen in Wuhan 2 years ago for the organization of the second Great Rivers Forum, where the Global Network organized the specific sessions on water museums and rivers. And now Professor Vansen is about to publishing an important volume for UNESCO, which is 900 pages on how people live with their rivers all over the world. Professor Vansen is passionate for nature and water. Since his earliest childhood, he studied animals and plants that live in rivers, lakes, and in the ocean. He walked on the ground of the River Rhine with a diving vessel. He made underwater climbing on the Amazonian floodplain trees and swam in the Pantanal wetland, which has become his second home. So after Professor Vansen's opening talk, I will leave the ground to Alice Chotard to introduce the other speakers and to moderate today's webinar. Alice Chotard is a communication and knowledge exchange manager of the REACH research program at the University of Oxford. Please, Professor Vansen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Heriberto. Can you hear me? Does it sound good?
Yes, very clear.
Okay, thank you. Panta kore kai uden mene. Heraclit's words that all is on the move and nothing stays the same is the most philosophical and at the same time the simplest way to describe rivers and their permanent change. They change themselves. They change whatever they carry, but they also change ourselves as we walk along them. For a sensitive person, it is absolutely impossible to take two identical walks along a river. And also, if you take a longer walk along one river, you will end up as a different person as you were before. Humans have always lived and along with rivers. They are the cradles of humanity. All plains on this planet have been made by water, and the river invites us to follow its borders. Rivers are elongate, that is their nature. Human territories, political and cultural ones, are compact. From this follows that if you walk along a river, you automatically cross borders. You will get into contact with different cultures. It is inspiring to learn how other people live, how they talk, sing, or how they interpret things differently that you thought they had just one meaning. River wandering is also an invitation to open-mindedness, to respect others, to learn. The river gives us what we need to live, and it threatens those that are greedy and want to get too close to its treasures. River culture is for me the way of living together with the river, respecting it, carefully using it, and taking care for it. Every floodplain is a creative space how to do this. And if you walk along the river, you enrich your life with these different perspectives. I can only recommend you to read Patrick Leigh Fermor's 2-volume diaries of walking along Rhine and Danube from the Hoek van Holland to Constantinople, a time of gifts and between the woods and the water. He had hiked this trek in the early 1930s, just before the world went on fire. At each place where he remained a bit longer, he dived deeply into history and culture. The Rhine-Danube axis spans open a 4-dimensional space of Europe. Every corner, every stone begins to live. Just fantastic. When you walk along a river, you should take time to sit next to it or to dive into it. To feel the river with all your senses. Let it whisper in your ear. Let your body drift away with it, but please not too much. Watch, listen to the always recognizable but permanently changing pattern of its rhythms. It is like variations to a theme, like Bach's Goldberg variations. They help you forget about your surroundings, to let your spirit spring up like water, to be free of your daily worries, and to be open for inspiration. And honestly, it is so much cheaper than paying $90 per hour for sitting on an outworn couch of your shrink who pretends to do just the same. Sit, watch, and let your mind flow with the river. I think that many of the presenters today have done this or want you to do. It is remarkable. And I thank Heriberto to bring together artists and scientists today to discuss jointly. They have complementary starting points, but they can meet and find common grounds. A scientist like me feels the incompleteness of its approach. Sometimes when doing a measurement on a river, I hold on and start dreaming. My co-workers hate me when I do that. And I'm just captured by the beauty, by the unfathomable, unmeasurable. At the same time, I feel guilty that I cannot stop the killing. Nature is fine china in our coarse hands, and it is falling into pieces. I witness the extinction. I imagine to hear the cry of just another population that is being annihilated. These giant river pearl mussels that were the last of their kind in Spain, 400 grams of pure mother of pearls, 80 to 100 years old, and they can travel hundreds of kilometers in the gills of a fish in their early life stages. No one has ever seen their youngsters in nature. A miracle and an enigma, and now gone. A friend of mine, Rafael Araujo, spent his lifetime work to save them. He could not. He died last week of brain cancer. Maybe the studies we did can help to revive them from the very last populations that still exist in France. I cannot speak much for the artist, despite that I just accompanied two artists, a photographer and a plastic artist, on their way to describe their feelings with the river, to express what cannot be described in scientific formulae. But I know we have to work together to make nature perceivable at all, to sense nature's beauty, nature's miracles, and to take loving care for it, as we would do for our own children. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Karl Matthias, for this brilliant introductory speech. Actually, a lot of the themes that you introduced, we will dive in and more deeply in this webinar, the way humans interact with the river, the cultural benefits, but also the threats that rivers face, what happens under the river, the extinction that some species are facing, and so much more. So it's my pleasure to be the moderator for this webinar today. As Ediberto introduced, this is the third webinar of our When Water Speaks series. The first webinar focused on the Himalayas, the second one on East Africa and Ethiopia in particular. This one has more of a European focus, but will also have hints of Latin America. So I'm very excited. And thematically, what we will focus on in this webinar is not just how we engage with the public, how science and the arts can engage with the public, but how we can actively involve the public in creating art and creating science. So we have two panels for today's session. We have an artistic panel and a scientific panel. And before we get started with the first panel, what I want to remind you of is if you have any questions, any comments, please post them in the chat. I've seen that quite a lot of you have already posted where you're joining from, and it's so nice to see people joining from really all over. I think we almost have all continents represented so far, so that's really brilliant. So do use the same chat box for posting your questions or comments, and we will come back to them later on. So for our artistic panel, my pleasure to introduce our three speakers, Peppie Wiersma, Dr. Kate Moore, and Iban Mikoji. We'll start with Peppie Wiersma, who is one of the founders and creative director of LUDWIG, which is a collective of artists and cultural entrepreneurs. LUDWIG develops a wide range of projects in close collaboration with scientists, artists, and CSOs, including WaterWalks, which she will speak about today. And so what is WaterWalks? Well, WaterWalks aims to raise awareness about the rapidly changing water environments we live in. And it invites people to take part in creating a visual map of our rivers and waterways with photos, videos, water quality measurements, sounds, and stories. So Peppie, I'm going to pass on the floor to you, and you can explain to us, what more about what WaterWalks is and how it is engaging the public and what it seeks to achieve. Over to you, Peppie.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you very much. And wonderful to see everybody here. And great to discuss these topics. It's, of course, more than ever, I think, totally relevant to think about these things, how to raise more awareness and to create more tools for people to participate in the climate change. So I'm very pleased to be able to tell you something about WaterWalks. It's a project that actually started out with a meeting with me and Leon Poa, whom many of you probably know. She's a water activist and an ecologist. She walks rivers. She has a project which is called Drinkable Rivers. And basically she collects data and talks to people why the water of the rivers cannot be drunk anymore as just drinking water. So how can we get the rivers in that state? We got talking together and it was fantastic. She's a very inspiring person. And we thought, how could we make a way that we could actually broaden the scope of only collecting scientific data, just water quality data, but maybe also try and collect soft data with images or stories or videos or whatever. We found a whole way of actually creating a new sort of database of rivers, which would speak to people more easily than just dry data. And so we started working together and thinking this, and it was, of course, difficult to think of a way how you could create a platform like that. So as LUDWIG, we started to try out to find a method, a sort of digital platform where where everybody could give in information of their personal perspective of the river. So we developed an app, and people all over the world with this app can just walk along the river and collect soft and hard data. So you can put photos in, you can collect stories, you can just tell your own text, you can show where you are. There's possibility of 360 photos. So basically with this app, if all goes well, and what we dream of is in the end, the whole planet, the whole world will be filled out with all sorts of input from all sorts of people over the world. But for now, that's a lovely dream image, and we're just starting out this project. We've done a couple of WaterWalks so far, testing the new equipment, testing the app, and the website that is connected to it, where you can see everything, all the data that are being collected by everybody. We had in 2019, we had a first walk, a test walk along the Amstel by Amsterdam. It's a fairly short river. And we walked with 3 people, 3 different perspectives. Leon was there as the ecologist and drinkable river person, and Kate Moore was there, who you will hear later on in the webinar, and Quirin Winkler, who is a program maker. So we had 3 different perspectives, and they all collected stuff from the River Amstel. And that was a great experiment. So we decided to go on, and in fact, Kate Moore was so inspired by the Amstel Water Walk that she decided to walk a very long way from Os in the Netherlands to Kildare in Ireland. It was a 6-week walk where she collected all sorts of data and photos and videos. And actually, it was an artistic research, it turned out to be in the end. She will tell more about that. It's a fantastic project with I think, great perspective. Then in 2020 was Corona. We did a 3rd small water walk along the IJmuiden just with a few people. And last year we did a bigger one where we first time engaged people of the general public, asking them to contribute as well to the website. The project is slowly growing, but steadily. It's wonderful to be able to speak about it here. And of course, we have a collaboration with the Global Network and with Alice from Oxford, and it's wonderful to work together in a broader sense and also geographically in a broader way. Today we had a little mini water walk, which we can show you a tiny little clip. Unfortunately, just at the moment that we started off, there was a global crash from YouTube and Google. So our program was a tiny bit disrupted, but we can still show you some results from what we collected. There were 2 people walking along, Hilde Senema from the TU Delft, and Hans van Weel from the Maritime Museum. He's a plastic, a plastic fanatic, if I could say it. He knows all about plastic. They both walked in Rotterdam. We'll show you the little clip now. Yes, that was a very short impression. We had only a small amount of time to put things together. I hope it made some things clear, but we have a site for WaterWalks, waterwalks.nl, where you can see more things. And perhaps it's nice, next year we will be branching out into a bigger project in Rotterdam, working together with the Rotterdam city, and do 6 walks from different themes like biodiversity, architecture, heritage, innovation. So we will have 6 different walks from different themes. And I think one thing is really important. We've decided that actually education is so important in this new vision of connecting people to the times we live in and the water issues, that we're going to focus very much on education and work together with schools. I hope in many places to develop a WaterWalks project that schools can just, or museums can just adapt into their program. And we're talking with a lot of people, also with Heriberto, of course, about this. So Heriberto, no, Alice. This was my...
For this introduction of WaterWalks. So we're going to now move on to Dr. Kate Moore. And as Peppie mentioned, Kate was part of the, as I understand, the first edition of WaterWalks in 2019, and she then walked on for the second edition across 3 countries, so the Netherlands, the UK, and Ireland. And so she is an internationally acclaimed composer and a river explorer. I think this is such a great combination. She holds a doctorate from the Sydney University Conservatorium of Music, a master's from the Royal Conservatory of The Hague, and an honours degree from the Australian National University. And so today she's going to give us a little bit more of a flavor of this second expedition, and through in particular a piece she composed, Song of the Ox. So Kate, over to you. I think you're still on mute, Kate.
Hello, I think that's, thanks Alice, and hello everybody. I'm really happy to be here, and thanks for inviting me, and thank you Peppie. Essentially, I'm invited here because of my involvement with LUDWIG and conversations with Peppie about this subject, and it was a huge honor to be in the first edition, walking along the Amstel, and I'm a big fan of walking, full stop, rivers, landscape, everything. But indeed, I was very inspired by this project, and it inspired me to go further with my artistic research. Essentially, my biggest question is related to landscape and identity and cultural context. And this comes from my personal experience, which very interestingly is sort of comes full circle in this project, because I was born in Oxford, coincidentally, and I spent my first years in Wallingford, which is very close by, along the Thames. So the Thames River is the river of my early childhood, and was very informative and very important to me as a very young person. And then as my family left and moved to Australia, a big part of my exploration and my search, my journey, is about finding a place for myself, finding where I belong, and sort of a connection with landscape. Which, as I think about the Australian landscape, as it's very beautiful and I love it very much, there's always this question of, is it my landscape? Do I belong here? In recent years, I've been reading a lot about Aboriginal culture and heritage, and in particular the songlines. And there's a very big exhibition now, which is being exhibited in Plymouth, called The Songlines. And it's becoming a big thing in people's conscience now at the moment. With the songlines is the Aboriginal collective memory, the collective conscience, I guess we know it as the dream time. But I'm thinking about the songlines. It's very inspiring to me that this is the collective memory in connection to landscape. And in growing up in Australia, wanting to connect to the landscape and wanting to understand Aboriginal heritage better in order to understand myself better, I realized that I have to go back to my ancestral and cultural heritage, which essentially is between these 3 countries of the Netherlands, the UK, and Ireland. And so this project gave me the opportunity to, in a way, create my own lines of song. So I created a route following the major river systems from from the Netherlands to Ireland. To explain that is that my mother is Dutch and was born in the Netherlands in a town very close to the Rhine. And my father, although born in Australia, comes from Irish heritage. So that is the connection of the three countries that I wanted to draw a line. So I made a route starting in Den Bosch and then to Os, and then following the Maas across, catching to the Hook van Holland, and catching the ferry across, and then following the Bulbourne to the Thames Valley to Oxfordshire, and then going further to crossing the Severn, and then through Wales, and then crossing the ferry from Fishguard, and from Cork taking a detour to Kildare, and then back to Cork. So my route was essentially Den Bosch to Cork, taking in Os and Kildare. And my artistic inspiration was St. Bridget and the Ox, which, curiously enough, I saw an icon of St. Bridget and the Ox in Den Bosch, at the St. Jan Cathedral, and that kind of gave me the initial spark to make this route, funnily enough. So I linked place names which had something to do with an ox, for example, Os, and then Oxford, of course, and then Cowbridge in Wales. And then from there took on place names that had some sort of reference to St. Bridget, such as St. Bride's. In the Vale of Glamorgan, there are at least three villages with the same name, St. Bride's, and St. Bride's in Pembrokeshire, and then St. Bride's Bay, and then Kildare is the place where St. Bride or St. Bridget came from, and the Holy Wells there. And both the Ox and St. Bridget have a connection to water, that St. Bridget is connected to the goddess Bridget, who presided over the underground water, and her animal symbol is the ox, and the ox as a beast of burden is known because the ox walked along the rivers in order to pull barges and as a working animal. So that route was very informative, and it gave me a lot of inspiration to go further. And so I've been developing a project which in a way is related to earlier research or earlier thoughts about the connection between water and music, or the word water and the word music. I wrote a piece called Ishka, which, going back to Ireland, is the Irish word for water. And I really loved this word because it looked like the word music. And it made me think about the Greek letter mu. Ishka, it's a really sort of interesting connection, but the Greek letter mu is a symbol for water, which then has a connection to the muses. The muses were nymphs, goddesses of, and they were water nymphs. And they presided over music and the arts and lyric poetry. And they were the daughter of Mnemosyne, which is the goddess of memory. So making a connection between music, water, and memory became a spark of inspiration for me, which also has a connection to the song lines and to finding a place in the landscape. So essentially, the project that I'm going to show to you today is an ongoing research project. I made an installation with porcelain, and it's based on an alphabet that I made based on the year rings of trees, and this comes from the want to make an alphabet based on thoughts about memory and music, and the and the connection with the Ogham alphabet, which in theory was invented by St. Bridget. And then using porcelain, I make these discs which represent the earrings of trees, and the material of porcelain being like stone has a connection to petrified wood, and petrified wood being capturing the memory rings of trees, sort of immortalizing them, and sort of an immortalization of memory. So this installation that I'm going to show is a series of these discs, which are about the petrified wood and memory rings, creating alphabet and making a story in stone. And I fired the porcelain so high that it became glass-like. So I can use it as a light. So I put a candle flame behind each disc. And the candle flame has symbolic meaning as well, in that, for example, using candles in prayer to remember people, to remember a person, to remember the past or past events, but also that the flame represents fire. And in thinking, going back to Australia and the songlines and the bushfires, that it also represents the destruction of memory. So I think on that note, I might have reached my limit of speaking. I'd like to show the video of my installation.
Thank you, Kate. That was very mesmerizing and also very interesting to hear the meaning behind it and how it was written and composed. So we're now going to move on to walking along rivers and interacting with rivers on the side in a way, to diving deep under the rivers, and with another river explorer, but this time not a composer or musician, but an audiovisual artist. So it's my pleasure to introduce Iban Mikoji, who is a river. He coins himself as a river explorer. He's led hundreds of expeditions, and he's also an audiovisual artist. He was born, raised, and is based in Venezuela, and he's passionate about the preservation of aquatic habitats of South America in particular. So we're moving away from Europe all the way to South America. And he believes that in order to preserve these ecosystems, it's necessary to make them known, the richness and beauty of these biomes. And he's also the inventor of the Wild Aquarium movements that some of you may have heard of, which involve setting up an aquarium near a water body or an aquatic environment, which mimics the habitats on the spot. And it's an educational tool. So Iban, please, could you show us some of what these aquatic environment looks like through your eyes and through your equipment? And then I'm also very keen to hear you speak about what those wild aquariums are and how you're engaging the public through those.
Well, hello to everyone. It is so nice to be here connected with all of you today. I have a slideshow that I wanted to share. And is it visible to everyone?
Yes, we can see.
Perfect. So here I am in the Amazonian jungle underwater. And let me tell you what I do. So I have been exploring the Orinoco River Basin in Venezuela and Colombia now for 15 years. And what I do is that I go out and I explore and I document the flora, not only above water, but also underwater. We document also the animals that are above water also, and underwater. We video, we photograph the piranhas, we photograph the stingrays, the freshwater stingrays, the aquatic snakes, the reptiles underwater, and the mammals. And we also document the geology. The geology is very important in any ecosystem. And the water. The water, we take the water parameters, the temperature, the GH, the KH, all of those, and we record it through times, through the seasons, how water changes in levels, etc. And the most important thing we do is that we try to explain to the people the relationship between all these organisms and everything that is in the habitat and how they relate, how everything is works together, and how the losing of one affects the other. So all these trips bring us to very remote areas. Here I am with the Hibi indigenous people, and you get to photograph and find new species like the orchid on the right. It's a new species that we found of orchid, and you also get to photograph species that had never been photographed before alive, like the Cleates abdita orchid. But we don't have to go very far down here to find new species. This is the Cabriales River. If I walk 5 minutes from my house right now where I'm here, this is our main river in Valencia, Venezuela, and it goes right through the middle of the city. And we just found a new species of Trichomectris, which is a small catfish. We're actually looking for funding to describe it scientifically, but we don't have to go far here to find new species. And we get all this audiovisual data. We get the videos, we get the pictures, and we do eco-educational tools. For example, we do exhibitions with the pictures because we believe that you cannot preserve something that you don't know exists. So we bring it to the public. The public most of the times can't go and see what they need to preserve. So we bring it to them. We show them the pictures, we explain to them. I also paint. So we also do paint-related aquatic subjects. So we do those exhibitions as well. We also do stamps for many countries, and we make books, which most are for free download on our website for people to learn what we have found and we discovered. But when I talk about my work, I usually talk in plural as we, because I don't do this by myself. There's so many people that help us. This is just there's more than 50. We have ichthyologists, herpetologists. We got musicians that have joined us and say, hey, I want to help you guys and I want to put my music on it. And they help us. We have artists that paint our pictures and do exhibitions with us, and they use their illustrations in books. And we have the local people that help us as well. So it's a work that is between many people. Now I wanted to share with you 1 minute of a video. It's a new documentary we just created. And I wanted to share to you how we create empathy with these videos. Sarah, can you show them? Sarah's gonna share it.
This is one of the most fascinating places I have ever explored. It is so hard for me to find the correct words to describe the magnificence the landscape irradiates to all your senses. I guess the best description would be a powerful sense of prehistory, of traveling back in time to the place where everything was created, where life started. You feel in the cosmogony.
So that's the 1 minute of our latest documentary. That's the first minute, how it starts. And the other thing I wanted to talk to you about was the Wild Aquariums. This is the most where we have most impact on reaching people. Our YouTube channel has like over 45,000 subscribers, and the videos that have most views are the Wild Aquariums. There's some that have more than 6 million views. And the Wild Aquarium, as Alice was telling you, is bringing an aquarium to an aquatic habitat and showing people what is in them, creating an aquarium. Because a lot of rivers are silty, people can't see in them. So this is a good way. It's a movement we started some years ago. And here you could see on the left, this is in the country of Georgia, in the snow. People go out in the snow because the seasons change, so they want to show the different fish that are there. This one is in Greece. This one is in Puebla, Mexico. And this one in the top corner is really interesting. This is one we made with the authorities in Oaxaca, Mexico. And what we did is that they had a species of fish that was going extinct in the river. So we went and we created a wild aquarium. We brought the authorities, we brought biologists and teachers, and we brought the kids from the school, the local school. And the river is, if you can see on the right-hand corner, it's really silty. You can't see in it. And the kids didn't know about this fish that was going extinct. So we divided the kids into groups. Some had to look for the rocks. Some were picking up the rocks, the sand, and brought it to the aquarium. Some were picking up the microinvertebrates, et cetera, the shrimp and others, the fish. And we put everything in the aquarium and we explained to them what each did. And we said, listen, this little fish that is going extinct is the one that eats the mosquito larvae that gives you dengue, chikungunya, or Zika, which they had a dengue outbreak. And this fish can, even save your life. And since then, at the end, after we explained everything and how it works, we put everything back they put everything back in their habitat. And from that moment on, every time they went to school, it was not just the brown river, it was their special river that had this special fish that they had to take care of. And that is an incredible tool to create empathy. And that's how we do it here. That's what we're doing.
Thank you, Iban. That's great. And what I really pick up from these three presentations, I mean, you're part of the artistic panel, but they all involve some element of, of science, some scientific message you're communicating. and also how you actively engage with the public. And we're going to pick up on some ideas, some of these ideas. Oh, I'm sorry, Iban, were you finished?
Yes, yeah, I'm finished.
Yes, you were. Okay, brilliant. Okay,
yes.
So we're now going to move on to our scientific panel. But again, we're going to pick up on some of these ideas of how you engage with the public and how you can actively involve the public to contribute to scientific knowledge and greater awareness. So our first speaker of the scientific panel is Dr. Izzy Bishop, who's a freshwater ecologist by background, currently working for Earthwatch Europe, where they have been leading the global citizen science project Freshwater Watch. Izzy has collaborated on several projects, including working with the English Environmental Agency and the United Nations to work out how citizens can play a role in national and global freshwater monitoring schemes. And some of you may already be aware of this term of citizen scientist, but Izzy will tell us more about that. So Izzy, please, can you explain what the Freshwater Program is and how it's contributing to a greater scientific and public knowledge around the value and state of our rivers worldwide?
I can, absolutely. And thank you for that lovely introduction. So I, as mentioned, I work for an environmental charity called Earthwatch Europe, and we are all about connecting people with nature. And one of the key tools that we do that with is citizen science. Citizen science is this idea of anybody who is not a professional scientist getting involved in science, and that's any part of the scientific process, from designing a research project, coming up with a question, collecting data, analyzing data, publishing and sharing results. And I think citizen science really holds quite a special place in my heart personally. My mum was a maths teacher and raised me to have quite an analytical scientific brain. My dad is a fine artist and art historian. And when I was growing up, he was writing a PhD thesis on landscapes and the sublime in Snowdonia. And he would tell these stories about how and why these artists were painting landscapes, often of lakes, to reflect the importance of that landscape to themselves and to humanity, and also the experience of being there. And I think I've really taken a huge amount of that into my scientific practice. I've really embraced this idea that science is not just about collecting data in a very methodological way. It's about experiencing the environment and learning about it. So what I want to do is just talk you through the citizen science project that I work on, which is called Freshwater Watch. Freshwater Watch is a global project. People around the world can collect data on the basic state of any freshwater ecosystem, most focus on rivers. And it's very, very simple, very easily accessible. What you can see in this picture is some simple chemical tests for nutrients, phosphates and nitrates, which are present in all aquatic systems, but when they're present in high concentrations, they can cause algal blooms, which cause kind of algal decomposition in the water, reduce oxygen, and can cause kind of dead zones in rivers. And the really nice thing about this is that it's very simple, and anybody can go out and you get this bright pink color if there's excess nutrients in the water. So it's a very visual and experiential learning experience for people who are going and collecting this data. We have just hit over 30, we've now hit over 30,000 measurements across the world from 30 different countries. And the data has been used in 25 peer-reviewed publications now. So while these people are going out and experiencing and contributing to science, it is producing some really kind of real-world scientific change that's happening. just to kind of illustrate this, I thought I'd talk to you about 3 different citizen scientists and the impacts that they're having. So if you could move to the next slide, please. So these people, who's, I think the young boy is named Solomon, I've forgotten the guy's name. They are in Zambia. And we have a project with schools in Zambia, where school children are going out and every month measuring the water quality of the Kafue River. The Kafue is a tributary of the Zambezi. It's impacted by mining, hydroelectricity, domestic pollution, climate change, and agriculture. So there's a lot going on. And the really cool thing about this is that these school children are getting out, learning about the river, but the data they're collecting is being fed directly to the Water Resources Monitoring Authority in Zambia. And they are using it to monitor progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. So these are these international goals that UN member states have agreed to, one of which is about improving water quality. So the citizen scientists here are contributing to our global understanding of water ecosystems and how we can improve them. We've also got citizen scientists in the UK whose data is being fed to the Environment Agency, and in the Netherlands whose data is being fed to Waterschap-Dommel, who are a water agency in Eindhoven. So there are kind of these individual experiences of going out and collecting this data are impacting policy on national and international levels, which is really cool. So next picture, please. Waiting for it to come up so I can remember. Ah, yes, here we go. So this is Qatar. And the point here is that while this data can be used by scientists on an international level, it can also be used on a very local level. Qatar is a dairy farmer in Ireland, and he's been measuring water quality in his streams twice a month, and also at key periods during his farming year. So, for example, when he's allowing cattle out onto the fields to graze, or when he's applying slurry to the land. And he has used his results to kind of analyze the impacts of his land management practices on his local stream. And he's found that just by letting cattle graze directly next to the stream, the water quality downstream is being severely impacted. And what he's done is he's now fenced off very, very small areas of his stream so the cattle can't access, provided water troughs instead, and is talking to his downstream farmers and his upstream farmers, trying to convince them to do the same thing. So again, this kind of experience, before this, he didn't know anything about water quality, but now that he can see this thing turning bright pink in his hand, he's able to actually learn and change his behaviors because of it. So next one, please. So this example is about taking that individual learning and behavior and creating a national movement from it. So here in the UK, there is something very interesting going on at the moment. There is a mass public outcry against sewage pollution in rivers. This is one of our citizen scientists in Oxfordshire. Her name is Anne. And she's been collecting data on the River Evenlode for 3 years now, upstream and downstream of a treatment works. This is where she measures. The water is supposed to be gin clear. It's clearly not. And her data shows that the sewage treatment works is impacting the river quite badly. That data has contributed to there's lots of other groups around the country measuring similar things and observing similar things. And that's contributed to this sort of mass vocalization of concern for our rivers and for sewage pollution. last week, an amendment to our new environment bill was posed in Parliament to specifically address the sewage pollution problem. It was initially rejected, and there was massive public outcry from citizen scientists and their connections all around the country. And it caused a government U-turn. So they're now revisiting this issue and trying to improve the strength of the legislation. So that's a very, very whistle-stop tour. But what I hope I've illustrated through these stories is that there is really something in connecting people to nature. The mechanism that we're using here is scientific data. And that scientific data in and of itself is powerful. But what's more powerful is the fact that we're improving the understanding of people, and we're allowing them to experience it themselves by measuring it. We're not just telling them, they're experiencing it. And that is, to me, that's the single biggest thing that is causing these kind of behavioral change, community change, community kind of outcry about the state of our rivers. And for me, that's the beauty of citizen science. It is about more than just science. I think that's all I wanted to say. If you do, I will stick my email in the chat and some websites. And if anyone does have any questions, you're more than welcome to contact me.
Great, thank you, Izzy. And we'll have time at the end for some questions. So if you have any questions for any of the panelists, you can post them in the chat. Really interesting, and actually, you know, living in Oxford, it's been fascinating following the movements to improve monitoring of rivers and the citizen science movement. It's been really, really interesting, and I'm eagerly following and hoping something, you know, at the higher level comes out of it with the water companies. Great. So we are now going to move on to Dr. Kevin Grech. And we're going to pick up on this idea of interacting with the river or around the river. But in this instance, Kevin is going to speak to us about interacting with stakeholders in particular. So Kevin is a departmental lecturer and course director for the MSc and MPhil in Water Science, Policy and Management, which I actually did some years ago at the School of Geography and the Environment at the University of Oxford. Kevin is a social scientist who specializes in normative and analytical aspects of governance, especially with regards to water and climate change adaptation. So he has been using Drought Walks as part of his work, and he's going to be speaking to us more about that. And this involves walking and discussing issues of drought and water security with stakeholders at places where drought happened, rather than in an institutional setting. So Kevin, as I turn to you, could you please explain what those drought walks are and how engaging stakeholders and water professionals through these drought walks can help raise awareness and generate knowledge about water scarcity and the value of water?
Yeah, thank you, Alice. Yeah, and welcome to everyone. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about this. So I think my original motivation to offer these drought walks was that I was quite tired and, to be honest, fed up going to like academic conferences where you sit the whole day in a room, you go from panel to panel. Often academic conferences take place in universities, and for some strange reasons, there are never windows in seminar rooms. So you miss out on these things. And when 3 years ago, a conference came up in Birmingham, and they were asking for like innovative formats during the conference, I just said, like, let's just do it. Let's try a different way. So I offered a lunchtime walk through the city of Birmingham. And this was actually before a colleague and I were starting a research project, because we wanted to gather some more input from stakeholders. So obviously we had our hypothesis, we had our research questions, but we wanted to get a little bit more like what's on the ground, because obviously as a researcher, often, I mean, we can read a lot, but sometimes you need to know what's going on the ground. So over the past 3 years, I did 2 of these walks, one in Birmingham, one in the center of London as well. And they both serve different purposes. So the one, as I said, in Birmingham was more about getting some more input on what stakeholders, and in this case, the stakeholders were water resources managers from water companies in England, but also people from the Environment Ministry, from the Environment Agency, but also other researchers, what they would be interested in. And the project was about water efficiency in the public sector and how to change behavior in the public sector, which employs 6 million people in the UK. So we saw that potential of changing water using behavior. And then the second one in London, that was actually then to present the results of that research. And again, in a setting, not just sitting in a room speaking to people, but just going out there. So for example, what I did, just to talk you through one of these walks in Birmingham, we walked from the place where the conference took place to one of the canals. And then I presented them with a narrative that a colleague provided to me, how in the 1980s, the woman whose main business or enterprise was to work on a canal boat, and that she got stuck in frozen water in, I think it was 1984 or so. So she couldn't exercise her business. And it's an extreme case of water scarcity and very unusual, but highlighting the fact that water scarcity, drought is all around us. And then Birmingham was quite nice because it's also the headquarters of Ofwat, which is the economic regulator for water in England, and also the headquarters of the Consumer Council for Water, which is, again, an agency. When you have problems with your water company, you can address them and then you kind of mediate. So these stops along places that are related to water serve as anchor points. So I developed some questions that I asked stakeholders just to engage them in the conversation. And I think a very useful kind of side effect and a very positive side effect of these walks is networking. Because if there's one thing I would say across my academic career so far that I found most useful is that to get people talking to each other and getting stakeholders who would normally not speak to each other for whatever reason, getting them to talk. And obviously when you walk from one point to another point, which takes a couple of minutes, they start introducing themselves, they start talking, and then they realize they share some interests, they have some good stories to tell, etc. So that is actually a very nice side effect. And the second thing that especially was highlighted in the second one, which was a walk through St. James's Park, so really right in central London, is that public parks serve a vital function, recreation, but they contain a lot of water features. There's usually a pond or a lake, there are fountains, drinking water fountains. And again, you can use them as anchor points to talk about different water aspects, but it also made clear to me how we should use or how we could use this for water education in the future. Because what happens, for example, in the UK, if there's a hot summer, the first headline picture you see in the newspapers is people sitting in their lounge chairs in a public park, enjoying the sun. So harnessing again that potential. I think what these types of walks require is some careful planning, because you have to you're going into a public space, and especially the second one in St. James's Park in central London, that was full of tourists. So you start screaming and shouting because there was so much noise going on. But nonetheless, the feedback I received from stakeholders was very, very, very good. And I think to finish off, my focus on these particular stakeholders is that obviously there's always a point or a case to make to engage with the public. And I do this as well, and this is fun. But these stakeholders, whether they come from the Environment Ministry, whether they are other researchers or work in water companies, they are the ones who may implement decisions. So they are key people that we need to try to talk to and to influence. And at the end of the day, they're not just professionals. They have a private life as well. They go home, they have a family, they talk about water issues. So getting that conversation on keeping it going. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Kevin. Really interesting to hear how this interaction with a place can be used for research in particular and for decision making as well. So now we're going to move on to our final speaker, Professor Carola Hein. Hope I'm pronouncing it right. Carola Hein is a professor and head history of agriculture and urban planning chair at Delft University of Technology. She's published widely in the field of architectural, urban, and planning history, and has tied historical analysis to contemporary development. She also has a keen interest in water issues with extensive experience in public engagement. So as I turn to you, Carola, I'd like to ask you how we can more effectively engage with the public to raise awareness about water issues. And if you can share some of those water-related awareness-raising initiatives that you have been leading.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction. It's a true pleasure to be here. And thanks also to all the prior speakers for their excellent interventions. And Kevin, also for this notion of the absence of water as much an imprint that we need to study. I think this is really very important. And I hope that we can add a bit to what you've already all shown by, I want to show you a couple of the things that we've been up to recently, and they enrich, I think, what you're doing. So among these things are 2 initiatives for open online free courses, so-called Moocs. And the 2 that we have, I'm just going to share my screen and tell me a little bit more about them. And then I would like to show you a little film in the end, which I think hopefully also complements what you all are doing. So the 2 courses actually form a pair on water, ports, cities, and landscapes. The first one is actually this one, which is Reimagining Port Cities, and it gives an idea of what we are trying to achieve in terms of connecting space, the physicality, of cities, of buildings, of rivers, of water, societies, so the institutions that are linked to it and the stakeholders that were just mentioned, to cultures, to art, to music, etc. And I'm arguing that culture in this sense is even broader, that it's not high culture, but effectively our entire way of thinking. And in some way, I think it links back to this concept of empathy that you just mentioned. So unless you have an awareness of water, a maritime mindset and maritime thinking, it will be difficult to have also empathy for the beings, the fish, all the elements that are part of water culture. And I think that in many ways, port cities are kind of the nodes in this complex between water and land, and the crossing of these 2 areas, which is often a very viscous space. So the second course that is, they're all currently running, they're all free, and all the material on it is free. So anybody who finds something that they would like to use for their own purposes, well, just let us know, or download it from the sites. The course that is currently running, and that is closest to what we all want to achieve, I think, is a WaterWorks Activating Heritage for Sustainable Development. And just to give you an idea about numbers, so the first Port City course, by the way, was about 600 participants. It's currently running again with about the same number. And I was really happy because we got, and from the Dutch system, a 9.1 on 10 from the participants for the course. So I do think that we are hitting something that works. Now for WaterWorks, the underlying idea for me is how can I link the fields of water and the fields of heritage and the built environment. And what I mean with that, water tends to be a forward-looking field trying to solve the burning issues of sustainable development, whereas heritage tends to be a field that is much more focused on a single building, on preservation. It's a field that moves rather slowly. And I think each of these fields can learn from the other. So the water field can learn from the heritage field in terms of the long-term developments. How have water systems of the past worked together? We should not just understanding also that if you talk about qanats in Iran, you need to have a whole comprehensive view of how this was connected from the heart of the structure to the society, to the culture, for example. So we are trying to get this systemic view this systemic, and simultaneously we're trying to get the systemic view of water as a network into the analysis of heritage. So when I say this, goes back to a couple of books where we've tried to build up on this, and to the idea, how can we also bring culture into the SDGs? I mean, the water SDGs are there, but culture is not necessarily what we focus on. But I do think with the UNESCO indicators for culture in the 2030 agenda, that this cultural thinking, the empathy, as you so brilliantly formulated it, is something that is inherent in all these principles, and we need to bring it further to the front. And so in that sense, the historic urban landscape approach of UNESCO does, I think, exactly that. So we bring heritage into a network perspective, and we have this network, which is the foundation for water, and give it a more longer term approach. So what I'm trying to do with also these courses is to connect initiatives like the historic urban landscape approach to the Valuing Water initiative. And so overcoming what are often more economic, finance-driven initiatives like this one to the heritage side. And obviously, we've already heard about all the brilliant initiatives from Lian and the WaterWalks that we are talking about right here. I can give you a couple of brief insights in the way that the course is set up, just to tell you a bit more. So, for example, in the course itself, we look at nature-based solutions. For example, the qanats in Iran, the way that these historic systems gather water from the mountains in a structured way, leading into irrigated lands, facilitating even having ice in the desert, keeping it for months, having nature-based solutions for cooling down buildings by using the cold water in the ground and leading the air through these kinds of areas. We also look at, for example, here, who makes these systems in the sense of the Dutch water boards, for example, who are the stakeholders in charge of maintaining water systems, of protecting people, of facilitating transport, and everything that is connected to it. And for me, this kind of awareness is really captured in this image, which I love, because it shows you a water mill, so where water is used for energy, this Wollmolen, energy related to wool, but the water that is streaming, that is driving the mill, is streaming into a polder, so a low-lying area in the Netherlands that has been dried so that people can live in there. And you need 5 windmills to get the water back out of the polder. This has led to several centuries of debate between all the stakeholders involved, because the people obviously who were in the windmills were not happy that they had to pump water out and spend energy where someone else was making money from actually flooding the polder. So this kind of broader understanding how water heritage practices, people, stakeholders are interconnected is what I try to bring out throughout the course. And that goes all the way to the stakeholders of today. And thinking about the VOC, the company that, spread the world through maritime practices in Amsterdam, or today the tourists that come into Amsterdam. I mean, those are the kind of stories that link water and heritage in multiple ways, and the various stakeholders that are related to it. And what I then mean with the idea of maritime mindsets, water awareness, is also going to this point. So what do we need for the future? Can we learn from historic practices, how rivers were historically used on a temporal basis, where sometimes you have flooding and you benefit from the flooding rather than keeping it out? And it seems to me that these kinds of river for the room types of approaches are much more important than the giant dams that have been recently presented and proposed to close the entire North Sea off to protect the landscape. So what we are also trying to do in this course is to come up with analytical tools that are easier to understand the complexity of water heritage or water-built environment challenges. So breaking it down to what I've been calling dualities. So for people who are interested in maritime practices, yes, the ships it helps the ships if they can go all the way around Russia rather than having ice there half of the time. But it also means that much of our historic landscapes and actually much of our cities will be underwater. And as Paula Vigano recently brilliantly put it, if we want to save Venice, we have to save the world. And breaking it down, I think, into analytical drawings can help capture the ideas and make them more easily to discuss. So if we talk about small scale agriculture like rice terraces in China, for example, we need to understand that these are part of an entire system that goes from the mountain and the forest in the mountain where the water is captured to the distribution system, down to the villages and the specific cultures and institutions related to it. And how does that intersect with, for example, intensive farming that may feed more people, but requires very different practices? I'm giving you one or two more, so we have 8 of them in whole. But it's a question of, do we use giant dams to help entire provinces? Think of the dams in the United States, or even dams between in Egypt and all the problems that are related to that. Or can we go back to more decentralized water practices that are feeding smaller populations that are not as easy to be controlled? So there's always pros and cons on both sides, but we have to make them discussable to then be able to find shared solutions. The urban expansion and water awareness is another of these examples. We could talk about historic preservation and economic development. So in this way, we're trying to create a foundation to have a broader discussion about all of these issues. And just going to show you one more thought. So it goes back, if we think of places like Venice, of how do we represent water? How do we represent water cities? How do we think about water institutions? Do we become aware of how the Doge's Palace not only looks, but also was run? And what kind of legal system existed in Venice historically to preserve even the riverbed? What kind of global networks were existing to keep these things alive? And how can we learn, for example, from places like this? So this on the right is the interior of the Doge's Palace, where we have these beautiful wells that the Venetians, even though they were in the middle of water, needed drinking water, clean water. And so they captured rainwater on the ground, which was filtered by sand and then could be taken up from these locations. So those are the kind of historic systems that we are showing in the course, analyzing in the course, to make people aware that this is a problem which hasn't perhaps been solved, so tourism, but the other problem, like the Mose, the system meant to shut off the lagoon may serve, may not serve, but these are the kinds of large-scale infrastructures that at a time of climate change will quickly be outdated. And this is another problem we need to solve, like the port of Marghera at the back of the Venice Lagoon. So now I want to just quickly shift over a little film we have made, which is called WaterWorks. It's 2 minutes, and I will just share that quickly with you as the final moment on how we try to use open access, freely shareable materials for everyone to disseminate this knowledge on how to connect water and heritage of water and the built environment more generally. Okay, so here we go.
Our lives depend on water. We need it to sustain ourselves, for culture and agriculture, recreation and transport, even for defense. But water is also a threat. Floods, tsunamis, and rainstorms can kill people and destroy their livelihoods. Water is always connected. Rivers flow to the sea, lakes evaporate, clouds produce rain or snow. Their flows connect to human-made systems for drinking water, irrigation, and sewage. People around the world have responded to the complex challenging of water for life on Earth. They have put systems in place to collect, contain, and move water around in ways that are often embedded in social and cultural systems. We make sense of our surroundings by giving our cities the names of rivers or mermaids, or a name that emphasizes a location near the sea. Our awareness of the importance of water for human life has decreased over time. In recent centuries, we've used ever more powerful tools to either exploit or resist water. But as we have built to avoid floods, we have lost the opportunity to live with water. For example, by capturing sediments that enrich the soil. Historic local water management systems can inspire us to find ways of meeting contemporary challenges related to climate change, industrial pollution, overuse of water for agriculture, farming, or mining. Understanding how people through the ages have valued water helps us realize that to live with water, you have to respect it and use it wisely. Co-creation by experts in the field of water management and heritage, as well as engagement of diverse communities, can lead to stronger designs and more sustainable solutions. To live with water is to ask time and again on many different levels how water works.
Thank you, Carola. That was great. And thanks to all our panelists. We're just in the interest of time, I'm going to close the presentation. But I just want to say it was fascinating to hear in all those presentations a running thread about the importance of engaging people, the public, including as well stakeholders and decision makers for scientific and artistic purposes. And one thing that really sticks with me is something that Iban said is the role of empathy. This is why we engage in rivers. And what is empathy? Empathy is connection. And so all these presentations have showed what that connection is. Is it our connection to the place? Is it our connection to the history, as Carola highlighted? In Kevin's presentation is also the connection to the memory of a place. In Izzy's presentation, it's about the importance of river, what value we attribute to rivers. So I really encourage you to think about this, the importance of connection and how you can bring it in your work. I think we have quite an interesting question at the end around the relationship between memory of people and social perception about the value of river. And maybe this is something that we can ask all the panelists. Not all of you need to answer, but I wonder if any of you have any final reflection on that relationship between memory and the social perception of the value of rivers. If any of you have final comments, maybe use that. Otherwise, I will pass on the floor to Heriberto. And I actually encourage you all in the audience participant to write down in the chat the name of the closest river that you are located nearby, that is close to you.
Yeah. May I?
Yes, absolutely, please do.
One important thing is the degree how close we are with our relationships to the river, also in dimensions of time. We have now made case studies on 28 different rivers worldwide, how people are related to their rivers. And you can see that there are different phases in river culture. The first is a kind of mixture of using the advantages given by the river, so fishing and so on, and fearing the river as something that can kill you with droughts. And then the next step, we are getting more and more capable of controlling the river entirely. And finally, we pollute it, and very often we kill most of the metazoan life, as we had it in the Rhine in the 1970s, when all fish practically died. And then we have a start that the population finds out, oh, we did something wrong and we have to do something. And unfortunately, the human being is not very good in discovering trends. We need some boom, some very hard event. In the Rhine, it was the Sandoz event with a catastrophic pollution, a spill of toxic substances that killed the remaining fish. And people woke up and started collaborating. We have studied other cases in Brazil, for example, where doctors were unhappy that too many people were dying of waterborne diseases, and somehow a movement started that the people would like to have their river back in shape, and step by step they got it. But we really have to see how we can motivate people, and where are they and what are their cultural backgrounds. In India, we have community-based conservation initiatives organized by the poorest of the poor. And they finally made it to get in touch with governmental organizations, and then finally transferred their private initiative into a public action. And in China, it's exactly vice versa. There, the government says, oh yes, we have made a mistake, the water is too polluted, and they established the river chief system, which is a top-down control. Somehow these two things have to match. And the important point how to get this is really the emotional link. And I think the presentations, both from the artists and from the scientists in this short presentations today, have shown this, how to reconnect it and how to overcome loss and interruption in cultural linkages, because we have forgotten it. If we have come up with a dirty river, we have forgotten the taste of a fish that has been caught in this river, and the taste of the water that you once could drink. And we have to overcome this. And if I see Ivan's fantastic underwater picture, if you're drifting in one of these jungle streams, you just open your mouth and you can drink the water. Or here at Lake Constance, we can just do the same, but this is rare. And actually, we need to feel nature with all our senses. And that is where really artists and scientists have to embrace, to work together to get this from both sides. We need to know in order to be able to laugh. That's a word by Goethe, not by me, but I think this is a very important statement.
Excellent. Those were very very good closing words. You give the opening words, and I think these were really good closing words. Unless any others, I can see Izzy has their hand up. So if
I will try and be quick, but I had a kind of closing thought that popped up then. And the one thing that I don't think we've touched on yet today is intergenerational connection. As scientists, we know this as shifting baseline syndrome, but the idea that as you move through time, you only experience what you experience. So your understanding of a pristine environment is based on what you experienced as a child. And I think Carolina's presentation really brought home how much that's happened in water, possibly more than any other environmental sphere. We have become so disconnected from water. And I'd love to talk to anybody here who's working in this arena about any new projects we can come up with that focus on using intergenerational connections to try and preserve that social memory of water and improve it in that way.
Thank you.
Maybe if I can respond to that briefly, I will, Isabel, if you're interested, there's a series of images I've been using in classes from an artist who started, I think, doing it in the 50s or 60s, where he documented the changing landscape. And if I can find it right now, I will show you. And this is an extremely detailed transformation of a city, from a traditional city to a modern city without nature, where water has changed. I would love to do something like that on water. And he also has a series on the changing landscape. So one is the changing city and the changing landscape by Jörg Müller. And that is, I've used it in classes as much for children from whatever, 8-10 years old to in the university. I can just actually, I think I have them online. If you want, I will just show them very quickly. But that would be really a nice initiative, potentially also to undertake together. Yeah, I'm just showing you the type of images that I'm talking about, and you can actually spend hours to understand the transition. So this is the series about the changing landscape, where you see a lush landscape that transforms, and he always shows 3-year periods, and then spring, summer, autumn, winter. And so you see, I mean, this is a mix of all the different scenes. It's just the quickest I could find, but you see how the city changes in the seasons with only 1 or 2 single elements remaining for each part.
Lots of ideas brewing, I can see. I'm going to pass on the mic to Heriberto, who's going to close the webinar.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all speakers for these inspiring contributions and presentations. I think that the speakers themselves made already some interesting conclusions. So basically, from the perspective of water museums, the main issue we tried to explore today, I think, is how can we represent new ways of reconnecting people to rivers and people to water. So definitely, citizen science methodologies and tools are a powerful kind of, how can we say, Copernican revolution in engaging people, also in making experiments, personal engagement towards water and rivers. So I guess if water museums can also find a way to exhibit, involve, invite people and visitors to explore more about their rivers, as we made such a wonderful list of the different rivers that are very close to our personal lives. I think that also water museums should find a way to engage more people. That has to deal with the social perceptions, with what we defined as a sense of place, which is, we hope, also in the future more closely linked to water and especially to rivers. I'm grateful to all speakers, to Kate Moore and to Iban Mikoji for the beautiful, wonderful videos we could share. All of these materials will be made available on our website, on the activities and webinars. You will find the links, the recording of this webinar, and also the links to the different videos we could share today. Thank you so much for your attention, and we are planning to organize the 4th event, connecting another continent, more artists, more scientists, and more waters. Thank you so much.